Good evening. The storm clouds over the Middle East grew darker today with a warning from the Israeli army that it was preparing for a long campaign against Palestinian unrest. It said the conflict could continue throughout next year, possibly spreading to the Lebanon. Israel's Prime Minister Ehud Barak accused Yasser Arafat of choosing the path of conflict. Mr. Arafat said to say that was bizarre and reprehensible. 3 more Palestinians died today, including a 13-year-old boy. More than 130 have been killed in a month of clashes, all but 8 of them Arabs. This report from our special correspondent, Ben Brown.
In this crisis, where you sleep can make the difference between life and death. These Jewish settler children have been moved out of their bedrooms and into the kitchen. Their parents feared they were in the firing line of Palestinian gunmen. Israeli tanks protect their settlement here on the outskirts of Jerusalem. They occasionally open fire, and when they do, it's the lives of Palestinian children that are suddenly in danger. A tank round has blasted through this bedroom wall. The 2 Palestinian youngsters inside had just been evacuated. Palestinian snipers may or may not have been using this building to shoot from, but the result is the same: more fear, more anger on both sides.
I don't believe peace now. After that, no peace. They don't want peace.
In Hebron, they were mourning a middle-aged man called Abdelaziz Abu Sneineh. He was killed in his home during a gun battle between Palestinians and Israelis. The brutal end of yet another life here, at least 130 dead so far in nearly a month of bloodshed, and still counting. Today, the Palestinian uprising here raged on. The Israeli army are now predicting it could last for many more months, well into next year, in fact. They're planning to ask the government for extra money and extra troops to cope with this crisis. The level of violence may have subsided, but it's now entered a daily ritual and routine. The peace process is one casualty, and the stability of the Middle East is another. At first it seemed this uprising was simply a short-term protest by the Palestinians, a sudden outburst of anger. But it's been going on for almost a month now, and increasingly it seems both sides, Israelis and Palestinians alike, are digging in for a long, drawn-out conflict. Ben Brown, BBC News, Ramallah on the West Bank.
And our Middle East correspondent Paul Adams joins me now from Jerusalem. Paul, tell us more about this assessment from the Israeli army. It seems to be about as bleak as it gets.
It is, and I think, frankly, it reflects the reality on the ground. I think the Israelis are beginning to realize what, frankly, the Palestinians have known all along, that this is not, as Ben Brown has just said, a periodic outburst of violence. This is the beginning of something that is going to go on for a very long time. I think when Yasser Arafat went to Camp David and talked to Ehud Barak back in the summer, he looked long and hard at what the Israelis were offering and realized that he was never going to get, with the Americans involved, the kind of deal that he as the Palestinian leader expected and knew that his people demanded. I think at that point he realized that what is happening now was inevitable and that it was only a matter of time before the violence would break out. And everyone you meet now on the Palestinian side says that this is not an uprising that can be given up because of a ceasefire or because of some limited agreement. This is a struggle for liberation.
Paul, briefly, is nothing now going on diplomatically to get these 2 sides talking?
No, there's plenty going on. Whether any of it is going to yield anything is very hard to say. President Clinton, in the twilight days of his presidency, is still trying hard. Tony Blair has been involved even today. The Russian leader Vladimir Putin. All of these leaders have been involved in an effort to try and quell the violence and see some way out of this. At the moment, none of them have succeeded, and I don't think, frankly, in the short term, any of them are going to.
Paul Adams in Jerusalem, thank you. The former Conservative Prime Minister, Sir Edward Heath, is to retire from the House of Commons at the next election after more than 50 years as an MP. Tonight, Tony Blair led the tribute, saying Sir Edward could be justly proud of taking Britain into the European community. This from our political correspondent, John Pinar.
Tonight, Ted Heath was at Heathrow Airport, looking relaxed but saying nothing about his decision to quit his beloved Commons. not in the mood possibly, but then the media panned his handling of the new Speaker's election yesterday, the way it dragged on, and the way he used his power as the longest-serving MP to refuse all appeals for a simple ballot.
Such a motion requires notice.
It's years since his word counted like that in his party. At Tory headquarters, the party leader chose to praise Sir Edward Heath's political longevity.
He is the only person to have served 50 years continuously in the 20th century in the House of Commons. To have done that and held the offices that he's held is quite a thing.
But there was nothing subtle about his relationship with the woman who took his place. Margaret Thatcher hated his pro-European centre-left thinking. He called her that woman, and he celebrated when she fell.
Because it was said that you rang your office and said, "Rejoice, rejoice."
I said it 3 times, I think. Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice.
He's never been an entirely typical Tory from the moment the grammar school-educated son of a carpenter became an MP 50 years ago. As Prime Minister, his crowning achievement was taking Britain into Europe. He saw it as the route to peace and prosperity. But in 1974, the oil crisis and the miners' strike put the lights out. There was a 3-day working week, and he lost the election.
He took them on and then said to people, who governs Britain? And it wasn't the miners who beat him, the people said. They supported the miners. They said, not you, Mr. Heath.
In recent times, he's often seemed to be a one-man dissident faction in his own party, but some senior figures believe his pro-Europeanism has left a valuable legacy.
Oh, a huge expansion in our trade to Europe, the creation of countless jobs, a dramatic surge in inward investment, and prosperity that we haven't seen in this country ever before.
Sir Edward Heath's been and done a lot more than most of his critics, but he's preferred the status of MP to the peerage which has been his for the asking. At a time when Parliament's influence is seen to have declined, he's one who sees backbench MP as a job worth doing. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
Railtrack Scotland has announced this evening that it's to close the West Coast main line between Glasgow and the border with England for 3 days. The closure is to allow safety engineers to inspect the rails for cracks following the crash at Hatfield last week. Earlier, the Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott said he'd do whatever was required to ensure Britain's railways are safe.
Railtrack says the West Coast line between Glasgow and the Scottish-English border will be closed to all trains from 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. The 3-day closure will let engineers carry out ultrasonic testing to check for cracks in the rails. Railtrack says it wants to do the work in one go instead of causing extended disruption over several weeks. But train company ScotRail's enraged by the decision, which came at virtually no notice. Tonight's sleeper services between London and Scotland have been cancelled, stranding 700 passengers. It's the latest safety move following the Hatfield crash, which is still being cleared up. Yesterday, the rail regulator identified billions of pounds that Railtrack needs to spend on safety work. Today, the government promised to implement the findings of Lord Cullen's inquiry into previous crashes.
All of this promises a new era for British Airways. We all want a safe and a well-performing railway, but the tragic event at Hatfield reminds us that in the future, as in the past, there must be no priority higher than safety, and that indeed is my guiding principle.
But the principal concern of the Conservatives is whether the performance penalties which they built into rail privatisation put Mr Prescott's priority in jeopardy.
Does he not now realise that it is the conflict between the fines for late trains and safety that contributed to Railtrack's and the contractors' failure of judgment?
The crash was marked at Leeds station today when passengers stopped at 12:23 to remember those who died. There was respect elsewhere on the East Coast line too, and at Hatfield work stopped for 1 minute. Tonight's line closure suggests the repercussions of the crash are still echoing nationwide and look set to continue for many weeks. Simon Montague, BBC News.
Connex, the train company that runs services in Sussex and Surrey, has been stripped of its franchise. It was criticised by the Strategic Rail Authority for poor timekeeping and dirty trains. The 20-year contract has gone to a rival firm, Govia. It's promised to spend £1.5 billion on passenger services. Connex services in Kent are not affected by today's announcement. Tony Blair has promised to put green issues back on the political agenda in his first major speech on the environment since becoming Prime Minister. Mr. Blair called on business and the public to form a partnership to protect the environment. But the Conservatives dismissed the speech as a late and grudging gesture.
This is a government that came to power promising to pursue and prove its green credentials. But environmentalists have become disillusioned with its failure to deliver. Today, Mr. Blair warned of the threat of climate change. He said it would bring worsening drought and floods and more skin cancers. He said environmentalists and industry should tackle this together. But once again, his critics complained he offered platitudes but little action.
We need more understanding, more dialogue, yes, a healthy recognition of areas of disagreement, and then a common campaign of explanation to put across the urgency of the problems and the viability of the solutions that we propose.
The Prime Minister did commit extra cash, £200 million, mostly lottery money, for wind power and other clean technologies. But conservationists said it wasn't enough. Mr. Blair was even accused of undermining his environment ministers.
John Prescott and Michael Meacher have been consistent supporters of the environment, but Tony Blair has never backed them. He never gave John Prescott the money for public transport. He never took on the biotech industry and said they shouldn't force genetically modified food down people's throats.
One key advisor wasn't at the speech. Jonathan Porritt was at Buckingham Palace collecting a CBE. He said Labour must still do more.
We are lagging behind in terms of other European countries on things like recycling, waste management, transport issues. So we've got some catch-up still to do.
Critically, Tony Blair did not bow to green pressure and defend high fuel taxes. These were initially introduced to wean people off cars. Protesters who want the tax cut recently brought the country to a standstill. The protesters say they'll do it again if the Prime Minister doesn't meet their demands by next month. Green lobby groups want him to stand firm in the interests of protecting the environment. Mr. Blair could find it increasingly difficult to take the middle ground on this. Margaret Gilmore, BBC News, West London.
British diplomats have been trying to find out more about 6 Britons who were detained in Cuba a fortnight ago and who've been held ever since without explanation. All are thought to be from the southeast of England. Our World Affairs correspondent Peter Biles joins me now from the Foreign Office. Bit of a mystery this, Peter.
It's very much a mystery because these 6 Britons were detained more than 2 weeks ago. It was on the 10th of October that the British Embassy in Havana was first notified about this. Since then, the embassy officials have been making daily inquiries to Cuban officials. They've been told absolutely nothing. Only today, when the Foreign Office here in London released news of the affair, was a meeting granted with the British consul in Havana, and that meeting has been going on in the past few hours in an attempt to secure access to the 6 Britons. But at this stage, that access has not been granted.
Any theories? I mean, do the Cubans think they've broken a spy ring or a smuggling gang?
It's impossible to say at this stage because we simply don't know. The Cubans have said absolutely nothing, apparently. All I can tell you is that there are unconfirmed reports that these 6 Britons may have been working for private security firms. But I think until such stage as access is granted and consular officials are able to talk to them, the situation is going to remain extremely confused.
So the government don't really know when they'll be able to tell us a bit more?
No, but there have been some hard words from the junior Foreign Office Minister, Peter Hain, who has said that he wants to call in the Cuban chargé d'affaires here in London tomorrow. If there is no explanation and no access to these 6 Britons by tomorrow, then the Cuban chargé will be summoned and an explanation demanded of him as to what has been going on.
Peter Biles, thank you. 1,300 people are to lose their jobs at a Panasonic factory in Cardiff. The Japanese electrical company is cutting its workforce by a half and says uncertainty over whether Britain will join the European single currency is one of the reasons. It's the latest in a series of job losses in the Welsh electronics industry. One of the bacteria that causes stomach ulcers could be linked to cot death, according to new research. The bug's been found in the windpipes of a number of babies who died from the syndrome and could be passed on through saliva. In his first in-depth interview since winning the Nobel Peace Prize earlier this month, South Korea's President Kim Dae-jung has told the BBC he's surprised that North Korea's leader Kim Jong-il wasn't named as a joint winner. President Kim was given the prize largely because of the historic steps made by North and South Korea this year towards reconciliation after half a century of hostility. Matt Fry met the president in South Korea's capital, Seoul.
This is democratic South Korea, not communist North Korea. But even here, audiences with the president are rare and elaborate affairs. There were no fewer than 5 press secretaries taking notes of our interview. The first given by Kim Dae-jung since becoming a Nobel laureate. First of all, congratulations, President Kim, on winning the Nobel Peace Prize. Tell me, were you surprised that this wasn't a joint award given to you and to the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-il?
저는 김정일 위원장하고 같이 받았으면.
Yes, I did think that it would have been better had the chairman shared this prize with me.
그리고
In particular, since the main reason for my being given the reward this year is the historic South-North Korean summit. And of course, that summit was not just my own work, but the joint work with Chairman Kim.
This was the summit that earned President Kim the prize. In June, he traveled to North Korea to meet Chairman Kim, reclusive leader of a closed state. Officially, the two Koreas are still at war with each other, so the fact that the two Kims hit it off gave real hopes for peace. But the jubilation also gave a hint why this Nobel Peace Prize could not be a joint award. Out of view, behind the rehearsed ecstasy, lies a country ruled by fear and stalked by hunger. At what stage do you mention human rights to Kim Jong-il in North Korea?
At this point, we have just begun the dialogue with North Korea. And at this point, I believe that we must begin with the issues that both sides are readily willing to deal with, the easy problems first. To bring something that would offend each other, to render the other side defensive, would not be very desirable at this point.
Every step forward is cautious and charged with emotion. In August, 100 divided families from the two Koreas were allowed to meet briefly. Brother and sister, father and son, separated for half a century. There are 10 million others like them. But 6 months ago, they and President Kim would not have even dared to dream of peace and peace prizes. Matt Fry, BBC News, Seoul.
Within the last hour, one of the world's best-known dot-com companies, Amazon, has announced losses of nearly £50 million. Shares in internet firms have collapsed in recent weeks as concerns grow that few of them will ever become profitable. Our internet correspondent Rory Ketland-Jones reports.
High anxiety for New York's high-tech investors, and as the market turns against internet firms, the spotlight tonight was on Amazon.com, the one company supposed to be a surefire winner. The online book retailer has just announced that while sales are up, it lost nearly £50 million in the last 3 months. During the dot-com craze, losses didn't matter. Now investors have sobered up.
Wall Street got fed up with no bottom line, and Wall Street decided that we don't want to wait for 2003 until Amazon can become profitable.
The change in sentiment towards dot-com firms has seen sky-high share prices fall to earth. Amazon shares were worth £78 at the peak, but are now £22, a 71% fall. The search engine Yahoo peaked at £179. Today's price was £44, 74% lower. For British dot-com firms like ClickMango, there's been a knock-on effect. The online health products retailer, promoted by Joanna Lumley, has closed after investors refused to put up more money. One of the founders says events across the Atlantic haven't helped.
Seeing Amazon's share price sink by 70% this year makes it very, very difficult for other online retailers, startups, to raise money. The fact is it erodes investor confidence, and Amazon, with their brand position and their clear leadership and early entry, if they're finding it hard, it's very, very difficult for newcomers.
Amazon's losses, announced after the market closed, weren't as bad as some had feared. By tomorrow, investors will have decided whether it's time to be a little more cheerful about the internet. Rory Ketland-Jones, BBC News.
Now sport, and with news of success for the England cricket team and tonight's Champions League football, here's Mary Rhodes.
Thank you, Peter. England's cricketers have won a remarkable victory in the first one-day international against Pakistan in Karachi. Andrew Flintoff made 84 as England reached their formidable target of 305 with nearly 3 overs to spare. The cornerstone of Pakistan's total was an extraordinary innings by the all-rounder Abdur Razzaq. He made 75 off just 40 balls as the home side reached 304 for 9. England's reply began amid controversy when Alex Stewart was adjudged caught behind to just the 4th ball, but only after a long wait. Despite half-centuries by Hick and Hussain, though, it was Flintoff's innings which proved the match winner as he enjoyed a century partnership with Graham Thorpe. And it was left to Thorpe to strike the winning runs as England reached their highest ever winning target in one-day history. Now, football and Leeds came within seconds of reaching the next phase of the Champions League for the first time in the club's history. They were denied by an injury-time goal from Rivaldo as Barcelona drew 1-1 at Elland Road. Leeds dominated the early stages and took the lead in some style after 5 minutes, Lee Bowyer scoring his 4th goal of this year's tournament. The home side were under pressure for much of the game and only a series of outstanding saves from Paul Robinson kept them ahead. But Barcelona finally equalised in the 94th minute, Rivaldo firing home a rebound to deny Leeds all 3 points. And that result means that David O'Leary's side still need a draw from their final match against AC Milan to guarantee qualification. The Italian side are already through after they defeated Besiktas. But there was even greater disappointment for Manchester United. They now face a struggle for qualification after a 2-1 defeat by Anderlecht. The Belgian side opened the scoring after 14 minutes, Thomas Rudzinski planting his shot firmly past Fabian Barthez. And further poor defending again proved costly for United, Rudzinski scoring his 2nd after half an hour. But a challenge on Andy Cole inside the area gave Sir Alex Ferguson's side a valuable opportunity just before the interval. And Dennis Irwin successfully converted the penalty, but United failed to score again. And that means that they must now win their final match in Group G to qualify for the second phase. PSV Eindhoven beating Dynamo Kiev in the night's other game. And in Nationwide Division 1, Fulham have been knocked off the top of the table after losing 1-0 to Preston. That's their first defeat of the season. Watford are now top following a 1-0 win over Bolton. Peter.
Thank you, Mary. A mystery art collector has donated more than 100 of the world's greatest works of art to France. The collection, which includes paintings by Cézanne, Manet and Picasso, has been described by the French museum authorities as the greatest donation of the century. They've refused to identify the benefactor, but have confirmed that he's French.
If you start at Cézanne, this self-portrait is one of a handful by the Impressionist, and go through to Giacometti with his famous long, thin figures, and take in just about every major 19th and 20th century artist in between, you get an idea of the scale of this anonymous donation to France's museums. All that's known is that the man is a scientist who clearly has a wonderful eye for art.
It's a fantastic present, which is interesting in this collection, but it's that all the paintings you see here were out of France, and he wanted to have it back to France, and that's important in this collection.
Museums have always depended on wealthy benefactors, but normally the owner is only too keen to be recognised for his or her generosity. The mystery scientist who bought all the paintings in the past 20 or 30 years, though, is determined to lie low. The museum won't say what the collection is worth.
This is very important, Mondrian.
So I took with me France's leading auctioneer to cast the professional eye.
If we had to give an estimate, it would be very unestimable. It's maybe, I don't know, maybe 300, 400 million of French francs, but maybe more. It's
so 30 or 40 million pounds for this collection?
Yeah, maybe, but maybe more, because the collection, the entire collection is so fantastic.
This is the most remarkable collection of paintings to be handed over to the French state this century. And while art critics are playing the parlour game, who was it who gave it, for art lovers there's the opportunity to see a superb collection of 19th and 20th century art. John Sopel, BBC News at the Musée d'Orsay, Paris.
And it's just before 26 minutes past 10. I'll be back a little later with the day's headlines, but now the news where you are.
Good evening. Scotland's West Coast Main Line is to close for the next 3 days. The announcement by Railtrack is described as a preliminary measure to allow safety checks to be carried out. It comes days after the Hatfield rail disaster, which left 4 people dead. Tonight, ScotRail, which runs sleeper services on the line, said they were enraged by the timing of the announcement, which has affected 700 commuters tonight and will hit thousands more who use the Virgin services over the next few days. ScotRail Managing Director Alistair McPherson said, "We are Railtrack's biggest customer. If this is their idea of customer service, it certainly isn't mine." Well, we join now our Consumer Affairs correspondent Gillian Marles at Central Station in Glasgow. Gillian, what's the extent of the disruption likely to be?
Well, for the 700 people, Jackie, who've turned up tonight, it's fairly extensive, isn't it? You can see behind me the board. It says that the Caledonian Sleeper is cancelled tonight, and it advises passengers who are wanting to travel on that train to go to the manager's office, and there's been a steady stream. Now, over the next 3 days, all trains travelling on the West Coast Main Line will have some disruption. Virgin says that it's drawing up an emergency timetable, and that might mean busing passengers to various stations to try and get round this track.
Gillian, do we know any more about the reasons behind Railtrack's decision to close the line?
Railtrack says it's purely a precautionary measure following the Hatfield rail disaster. They had 2 choices. They could have either closed the line or put delays on the line for several weeks, causing major disruption, they say, to passengers, or they could have closed it for the 3 days, which they've decided to do, and examine all the track. And that's what they believe was the best thing to do.
It seems strange to take such an important decision and not tell the rail companies, at least in plenty of time.
The rail companies, I think, as you just said, are furious. Virgin said that it thought that they were very concerned that the railway had been allowed to deteriorate to such an extent, and ScotRail said they were furious. They had virtually no notice of this, so not happy tonight.
Gillian Marles at Central Station, thank you very much indeed. And if you want more information about train services, you can call the National Rail Inquiry on 0345 48 49 50. Now, tonight's other news. There will be no compensation for hundreds of haemophiliacs who contracted the potentially deadly hepatitis C virus through NHS blood products. The Scottish Health Minister says a detailed investigation shows there was no professional negligence, but angry campaigners say the report is inadequate and fails to address key issues.
For John McGaughey, bitterly disappointing news today of this major setback in the long-running drive for compensation. He's one of hundreds of haemophiliacs in Scotland who contracted hepatitis C in the 1980s through contaminated batches of the blood clotting agent Factor VIII provided through the NHS.
It just takes all energy away from you. Fatigue is terrible. It's like somebody just switching off a power switch. You've got to lie down.
Successive governments have refused to compensate these hepatitis C cases, although haemophiliacs who contracted HIV were compensated. A core issue is whether the Scottish Blood Transfusion Service was negligent in how and when it eliminated hepatitis C from supplies. The Health Minister argues the inquiry has found no evidence that it was negligent and there is no case for compensation.
Of course I'm concerned to ensure that we also look to the future, to ensure that all those with hepatitis C, which is a growing number of people here in Scotland, get the care and treatment that they need. But I think that, albeit it is a difficult decision, I think we have reached the right decision in this case.
The report comes before the Health Committee tomorrow. Campaigners want a full public inquiry.
There's confusion tonight over promises made by the new Scottish Labour leader Henry McLeish to his own backbenchers. Mr McLeish promised improved links between civil servants in a policy unit and a Labour Party research team. Opposition parties say this amounts to politicisation of the civil service.
Henry McLeish had a mission to repair relations with Labour backbenchers who feel they've been frozen out of policy making. He promised open-door meetings and party consultation before Cabinet. But confusion arose over his paper titled Bringing Politics Back into the Heart of Government. That promised a policy unit reporting to him focused on political priorities. This unit would have improved links to Labour MSPs' researchers, and backbenchers would have direct access to civil servants where ministers agreed. Labour backbench office bearers initially struggled to explain whether that access would extend to opposition MSPs, and they swithered over the extent of links between a publicly funded policy unit and their own political party.
It perhaps is ambiguous, particularly in the summary, but I think what is important is that it was a paper for Labour backbenchers to show that Henry is going to be perhaps leading in a slightly different way.
By coincidence, Scotland's top civil servants were facing questions this afternoon on the Holyrood building project. Their duty is to the Crown, to ministers, in other words, not backbenchers, and certainly not political parties.
Within a matter of days, the Labour Party now appears to be attempting to politicise the civil service.
Frankly, if this is the way he's going to conduct business as First Minister, it demonstrates he's not up to the job before he's even started it.
Henry McLeish won't be First Minister until the Queen formally appoints him in Edinburgh on Friday. Senior advisers to the new leader insisted they'd been misrepresented and issued a clarification. That confirmed earlier indications there will be policy and communications units staffed by special advisor civil servants as at present. The new political unit will be funded by the trades unions and the party. Tonight, Henry McLeish won the support of the Liberal Democrats for the post of First Minister. After talks, they said they had received satisfactory assurances about the future of the coalition and progress towards electoral reform in local government.
There's been a call for the report into the weekend gas explosion which killed a Dundee couple to be published as soon as possible. The site has now been secured and safety experts have begun their examination. And now back to Peter Sissons in London.
And the main news tonight, the Israeli army says it's preparing for a long conflict with the Palestinians. 3 more Palestinians died today, including a 13-year-old boy. Here,